good afternoon, everyone. Fabulous to have you all here, and we'll begin with apologies. Sorry, we didn't quite. This was absolutely intended to be, as you can see from the title screen here. We were supposed to be running this one a month ago around learning teams. We had some horrible technical issues where the great, wonderful thing that is the NBN let us down terribly for a day. And so we were unable to bring it to you. So thanks so much for holding your registration. And if you happen to be one of those people that's jumped on in the meantime, welcome. You don't know what I'm talking about. That's a good thing. So welcome to our August Real Learners webinar, even though it says July on the screen. And it's all about today how it is that we can establish learning teams. In fact, I have come to believe really fervently that the key to transforming the way that our teams work together is to insert learning into it. Jonathan, thanks for having you, mate. Just checking your questions there. You'll hear me do that a little bit throughout the webinar. I'm going to check what the activity is, and I'll prime you for what that activity can be in just a minute. But like I was saying, I just think that this notion of being able to learn together, to achieve together, to celebrate together, opens up a whole new range of diverse possibilities for your business, for your organisation, and even for the teams that you might be working with. I want to today draw on experiences from multitudes of different worlds to kind of try and prove that point to you. I want to talk about my time as an educator, where learning kind of found its way under my skin and became something that has become my lifelong passion. I want to talk about business, and I want to talk about organisations that have got it right and perhaps even that have got it wrong. I want to talk about community. I want to talk about sport. I want to cover a little bit of everything as we go today. And I would love you to be a part of that. I would love it if today we could just build our own little team and do our own little exploration, our own little investigation into learning, and to perhaps even be able to learn and celebrate together. So jump on board around that. Now, there is something you can do to get involved today, and I say this at the beginning of every webinar, mindful as I am. We've usually got a few newbies coming along each and every time. So you've got a control panel in front of you. Now, experienced GoToWebinar users will know that there's a couple of ways you can get involved. Let me rattle through them quickly for you. Number one, do what Jonathan did, ask a question. There's a question box there, and what I will do is from time to time jump in there and just check it. You might even hear me pause, or you might even see my mouse move on the screen. It means I'm having a look to see whether you've written a question in there. You can also put your hand up. So I have this wonderful little button here that I can use to unmute you, and if you've got something that you want to ask, either to get some clarification, or you know what, even to challenge me. I'm mindful around this concept that when I come to speak about learning, that we've all got defaults, we've all got habits, and one of mine is to, I don't know, it's almost an arrogant thing, but I try to suppress it and push it away, is to assume that I know already a lot about learning, or I know enough, or I know everything about learning, and your job is to sit on the other end of that learning and bask in it, to enjoy it. You know what, you can ask clarifications in your questions today, sure, but if you want to challenge me so that I learn something on this trip today, then I'm up for that. So put your hand up or use the question box to be able to do that. In my research for today, I came across a quote that I just wanted to share with you. It's not one of those, amazing quotes by someone famous. In fact, I wish it was a quote that was made by somebody who had an easier name to say. But it was a quote by somebody called Nidhu Segal Gupta. And the quote is just very simply, let's go together whether it's near or far, so that we can celebrate success and learning together. And I think that that's really, for me, it's a really simple thing, but it sums up what learning's all about. First of all, that bit about let's go together whether it's near or far, is about saying that we don't have an end point. And great learning isn't about saying, did you get the answer right or wrong? Great learning is about saying, what did we find out? What did we discover? What did we design? And the second part of that quote says, so that we can celebrate success and learning together. I don't know about you, but there's something truly profound about being able to celebrate an achievement in the company of others. I think it's the reason that, when sporting events, when a team wins the Premiership or the World Cup, they don't go home and celebrate on their own. They do it together. And I think it's because they understand that the achievement was together, the celebration has to be together. Now, when we get the combination of those key componentries there around exploration, around celebration, around learning together, I think that what happens is we open up a far more diverse range of solutions to problems. When we get linear and we think that learning is a process towards a right or wrong answer, there's really only two possibilities. There's the right one and there's the wrong one. But what I think we do when we learn together is multiple perspectives provide multiple opportunities to see different ways of tackling different problems. And then what we're able to do when multiple people can see different ways of tackling it is synthesize that, and we can step up to higher order thinking, which is, really sometimes as simple as ranking things. Very much a higher order thinking skill is being able to take that diverse range of solutions and say, now, which is the best one? Which ones could be plan B, and which ones just plain old suck, that we just shouldn't go down that path. And it's the presence of multiple people who are engaged at the highest possible level that allows that to happen. Now, my contention to you is that we just don't do that enough in our businesses. We provide people with problems. We provide people with challenges. We define we define job descriptions, we define roles, and we allow people to work within those roles, and the collaborations that occur as a result of that tend to be quite accidental. I'm saying that we need to be far more intentional about that today, and that's what I'd like us to explore. So let's get cracking. First of all, I want to talk about what's in it for you. So when we come to the idea of building learning teams, that all sounds great because we're talking about the team, but what about the leader in the team? And what I would like to put to you today is that embarking with intention upon inserting or injecting learning as the fuel for your team in the way that they work actually repositions you as an authority within the team. Now, the good news is that just by virtue of the fact that being a leader, you already are an authority. It's just that there are two types of authority that we need to explore or be highly cognizant of. And one is the authority that is, just the authority. You're authoritarian. And you've got that authority because you have been promoted into that authority. It was bestowed upon you externally. And what happens when people rely on their power in a position of authority is that we get even a bit punitive about the way we work. We hit people over the head because they got the learning journey either right or wrong. We get too linear about it because we're the dictator, and that's what the dictators do. If you do the right thing by the dictator, you get praise. If you do the wrong thing by the dictator, you get executed. And what happens is that once you're executed, you're dead, and you're stuck with that label. You're dead to me. And when people are stuck with labels, the issue that we have is that they tend to live up to them, particularly negative labels. And that's what happens when we're authoritarian in the way that we work. We apply negative labels. People become the dumb one. People become the lazy one. People become the argumentative one. People become the black hatter. And once kind of you think you've got that label, and I tacitly agree to that label through my power, we reinforce it, and people choose a behavioural set that lives that label out, because let's be honest, we all like to be good at something. I prefer an authority that's best described by being authoritative, and I think that's what learning does. When you become authoritative, two things start to move, which means you're the leader, of course, but you are the leader because of the way you work, not because of the power you wield. And two things become evident within that. One is trust. People can know with consistency the way that you are going to tackle work because you are far more motivated by process than you are outcome. And the second thing that happens is that people respect you. And I think that respect is something that leaders typically crave. I get a lot of people tell me that your job as a leader is not to be their friend, and I agree. Your job is that they tell me that they would prefer to be respected than to be liked, and that's okay. But let's get clear about what we mean by respect. And for most people, they respect people who are both firm and fair with them. And this is why I connect learning to this position of authority, because if I was to ask all of you to think about the best teacher that you ever had when you were a kid, could be in your primary school or your secondary school existence, I would suggest to you that leader of learning that you conjured in your head right then, that favourite teacher, was both firm and fair. And so that's our ambition, is how it is that we could be authorities where we're working with people around learning rather than authoritarians who are doing the work to people or giving the work to people. And there's a whole different way that people respond to that we're going to explore a little bit today. Hey, I want to just show you my formula. The formula that I often speak to around how you can get great learning to happen is pretty simple. It's about, first of all, focusing on learning activity, then focus on learning relationships, which is kind of that whole firm and fair notion, and what are the practices that are deployed by the very best teacher that you ever had, and how that generates learning cultures. And what you get from those learning cultures are these types of things. You get transformation, you get growth, you get people who are creative, you get people who are genuinely plugged into what you're trying to do. You get increased levels of productivity, sometimes up to a level, some studies have shown that level of productivity can go up by up to 202% in an organisation, which is just wildly exciting. You get genuine problem-solving capabilities start to exude from these people, and as a result of that, there's a higher level of profitability. That our profitability doesn't just come from problems being solved and efficiencies being improved, but it comes from opportunities being identified because they think and behave in a much higher level, and that. What that gets you in return is you become a high trust organisation. Now, I want to work backwards a little bit today by saying, well, if our intention, if our habit, if our intention, if our ambition is to be high trust in terms of our teams, to have that trust and that respect that fuels those higher levels of productivity, how do we work back in terms of creating that culture where that learning imperative is lived out every single day? So I want to give you a few examples today, and then let you run amok with them. So the first one is that you have to be really intentional about it. So it's not good enough to say that I'm going to keep my team exactly the way it is, but I'm just going to I'm just going to chuck a little bit of learning into it, or I'm going to bolt a little bit of learning onto it. Yet your whole design for the way that your team works needs to be about collaboration rather than control. Now, the picture that I'm using here for you today is something that I wrote about recently. And I wrote about it because I went on a family holiday, and I often say that when I go on a family holiday, it's weird things happen to me when I go on holiday. My brain sort of stops from my own business, and it takes me a few days, but then I start noticing things around me that are pertinent and relevant to my business. So the one thing that I noticed on this trip, and it was a trip, just a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for my family and I to visit France and Italy. And the one thing that I noticed while we were in Paris was the different way that zebra crossings work. Now, we have zebra crossings here in Melbourne, where I'm located, and they have zebra crossings in Paris. And there's probably more of them in Paris, and that was probably the first thing I noticed. And then what I noticed is that the behaviour of people at the zebra crossings is completely different in Paris than it is in Australia, and it's because of the intention of the implementation of the zebra crossing. In Australia, our zebra crossings are built for control and accountability, and what I mean by that is that in Australia, if you cross at a zebra crossing and a car coming towards you doesn't stop, even if hopefully it's a near miss for you, but either way, that car can be charged. There's accountability for not using the zebra crossing the right way. Equally for pedestrians, if you were to cross in between two zebra crossings 100 metres apart, then you could be charged with jaywalking, and because there's accountability for both the pedestrian and for the vehicle as they approach that. And they're there, the zebra crossings in Australia are there to control the behaviour of the people that approach those zebra crossings. Not in Paris. Not in Paris. I noticed this odd thing happens in Paris when people walk up to zebra crossings, and it is that both cars and pedestrians are using zebra crossings at the same time. I thought, how does that work? And I watched from a cafe one day, eating my baguette or whatever it is that I was enjoying, and I watched, and there's just this thing that that zebra crossings in Paris are not designed for accountability and control. They're designed for help and support. They're designed so that the people who are there and the people who are driving vehicles there are able to get to where they want to go more efficiently. And there's kind of this unwritten agreement in Paris that when you walk up to a zebra crossing, that you'll look. you won't just charge on defiantly because I'm at the zebra crossing and you're at it. You're going to get charged if you don't use the zebra crossing the right way. They look around and they just say, well, there's some cars here. You know, I'll just let these couple go through and I'll be able to go. That'll be absolutely fine. And there's also the same with vehicles. They approach a zebra crossing and they'll stop if they see you a few metres away from the zebra crossing and they know there's nobody behind them. They'll just pull up and let you through, and everybody gives each other a little smile and a nod, and away they go. And I thought that's quite amazing. And there's also a look that the Parisians give each other when you use the zebra crossing the wrong way. So if I were to walk defiantly onto the zebra crossing, I don't get run over, I don't get yelled at, I don't get charged. I just get a look, and if I may speak so plainly, it's a look that other pedestrians and drivers will give you, which is kind of a look that says, don't be a dickhead. And I spotted that happen a couple of times. And what happens when people don't get charged, which is not a control thing, is that people realise that, oh, sorry, I was being a bit of a dickhead, and they back off. And I think it's fundamentally because of the intention for the way that implementation is going to work. So the analogy that I'm trying to draw here is that it's not good enough to say just clump people together in teams and then occasionally get them to learn. Your intention must be to build a team that will learn, whose business is learning, whose business is collaboration and cooperation, and whose business is not to be held accountable and to be controlled into meeting compliances. So it all begins where we start, which is amazingly important. So it all begins where we start. It's not quite the language that I was looking for there. It's all about how we start. It's all about our intention for how we're going to make this team work. I was thinking about it recently, actually. There's a couple of examples I want to give you here. There's one was a classroom that I walked into in a school recently, one of the partner schools that I work with, and the teacher there had her class set up in a horseshoe. And I said, okay, so basically the tables and chairs are in like a horseshoe shape in the classroom, and she takes a position of authority at the front of the room. And I spotted her sort of just struggling a bit, and the activities that she was giving the kids were often that they needed to work together and discuss things in groups. And I said, well, what's going on here? And she said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, I can see two modes. One was her in instruction, and one was where the students worked in groups. And she said, yeah. I said, well, the classroom architecture here doesn't give you any of that. You know, when you're in instruction, the students aren't facing you, so you're not even with them. You're just in this authority position, and it's difficult to control them. And I said, secondly, so we asked them to work in groups. I said, it's too hard for them. They can't get into groups when they're sitting in a horseshoe. And she went, oh, and she goes, so is horseshoe bad? I said, no, horseshoe's great if you're trying to work on something together and have a whole group discussion. But the architecture, the way that she was using the architecture of the room didn't match the way that she wanted the people to behave. So it's about setting it up from the beginning. And then I copped it myself. I went and did a presentation just this week for a group of about 50 people. And I got to the room and I wanted them to be able to have a high level of conversation in the room. And I took a colleague with me who was observing the session from the back, and he'd seen me run this workshop a couple of times before. But when we arrived there, the architecture of the room was such that people were sitting in rows at tables, and I thought, okay. And we finished, and he said something was off. Then my colleague said, you know, something wasn't the same as when I seen you do that before. And I said, yeah, so I think it was the architecture. And I've got to forgive myself sometimes because, you know, what I actually should have done is nothing to do with the 90 minutes that I spent with these people. What I should have done is spent the 20 minutes that I had before they arrived completely reconfiguring the room. And I would have got a completely different response from them. So it's all about the intention. It's all about saying, how do we want people to work? And can we design towards that? Which is a critically important decision to make. Some other things to think about. First of all is that I want you to, one of the things that's really important is to acknowledge the learning that's happened prior. It primes people to understand that learning is a priority, that the things they have already learned, the things that they have already achieved are being noticed and are being leveraged for future performance. I'm reading at the moment a fascinating book called Dark Emu, and it's one that's really sort of taken the Australian landscape by storm a little bit, by an incredible writer called Bruce Pascoe. And I don't read a lot of books that are written in the prose that Pascoe chooses, that are written from a really factual point of view, a lot of synthesis of research, and it's basically a look at what was going on in Australia just prior to pre-colonisation in 1788. And it's really throwing a rock at the notion we have that Aboriginal people were hunters and gatherers. And I thought, okay, I've looked at Indigenous culture quite a bit. I've worked with Indigenous people for many, many years now, and wondered, okay, what was it about my preconception about what was happening since 1788 that may potentially be wrong? And so I picked up Pascoe's book with a little bit of trepidation, and I discovered some things that I just couldn't believe what I was reading on one page, where it pointed out that Indigenous people in Australia had been taking the seeds from grasses and other plants for many, many years and had been grinding it up. They'd actually found grindstones where they'd done this to create a paste, and they found proof that this paste had been cooked. And it had been, they'd been baking bread, is what we're saying. And it's pretty much irrefutable that that's the case. Now, if you look anywhere in the world at when who were the first bakers, we'll be told they were the Egyptians, and that was something like 17,000 years ago. And Pascoe points out that we have absolute, irrefutable proof that Indigenous people in Australia were baking 15,000 years earlier than the Egyptians. And then he says, why on earth are we not celebrating this? Why are we not jumping up and down and saying, how awesome is it that Australia is the place where the first bakers in the world emerged from? And it prompted me to think, yeah, I think that there are times when we don't acknowledge what people have already got. We don't acknowledge the skills that people bring when we pull them together in a team. We just think about process and outcome way too quickly. A more contemporary example that's perhaps worth some consideration, and it's always one of my favourite topics to talk about, is the Richmond Football Club. And I read a fascinating book about their premiership year in 2017, a book called Yellow and Black by a wonderful writer called Conrad Marshall, and he talks to why Richmond sucked horribly in 2016 but were brilliant in 2017, and how the personnel hadn't changed an enormous amount. So what was the catalyst for that? And he goes through a meeting that happened when the football department, all the coaches came together to try and put their planning together for the season. And they noticed that every single year they came together, they looked at gaps. They thought, oh, we don't have enough big guys, or we don't have enough, great tacklers, or we don't have enough goal kickers, or we don't have enough goal stoppers. And so they looked at filling deficits far too often. And he said, what if we just looked at what we've got and then said, let's make an outrageous strength out of it? And what Richmond noticed was they did have some things missing. They didn't have enough big guys. They didn't have enough goal kickers, but they were fast. And so they said, well, what if we just make that our thing? And I think sometimes with teams, we pull them together with a desired outcome in mind, but we don't think about what have they already got? What have they already learned? What can they already do? What could be their thing? And allow that thing to be the fuel that rocket propels them towards the sorts of outcomes that we're looking for. So a really clever teacher will establish prior learning. We'll work out what her class already knows about fractions, about ancient Egypt, about verbs. They'll work out what they already know. And I think as leaders of learning teams, we need to be really cognizant of making sure that we take exactly the same step. The second thing I want to talk to you about is the flip of what I mentioned earlier around what the authoritarian leader does, and that is because what the authoritarian leader does is negatively stigmatise. They put labels on people, and I mentioned some of them that people live up to. So the flip of that, if you want a really fabulous team to come together, is to positively stigmatise, because if you've got a positive label, then that's something that you can live up to. James Clear talks about this, the author of the amazing Atomic Habits book that has swept the world. He talks about the fact that what you want to do is not just start going to the gym if you're looking to get fit. It's to become the kind of person who goes to the gym. And so he actually has encouraged, he's had several case studies where people have been encouraged who want to get fitter. And it's basically the first step towards that is get up in the morning, put your gym gear on and go to the gym, even if you don't do anything. Even if you walk into the gym, put your gear in one of the pigeonholes, pick it up again and walk out. Because what he says is we're trying to create for ourselves the label of being somebody who goes to the gym. I'm a gym goer. I'm a gym junkie. I've got a label that I'm slapping on myself that's useful to me, even if it's not yet completely true. It's a label that is useful to me. I go back to my days of of watching one classroom teacher who used to just do this beautifully with her class. And I knew, as I was the principal of the school, I knew I'd given her a tricky class. I knew she could cope. I knew she was a good practitioner, but I didn't know she could cope this well. She took this group of kids who were rather tricky and she turned them into this well-oiled machine that seemed to wander the school with immense pride at how awesome they were. And I said, how did you do that? What did you do that, you know, that made you exceed my expectations, basically? And she said, one of the things that I did was I tried to create a positive label for this class. She goes, everyone told me they were going to be the horror class. And I thought, wow, if I told them, or if I let them know that other people thought they were the horror class, then I think I could be pretty confident about the way they'll behave. I said, so what did you do? She goes, the very first morning I got them, I told them that I was so excited. So I told them that every year teachers worry about what class they're going to get. And the fact that when she saw her class list, all she could think was, wow, this is the best behaved class in the school. She said, I couldn't believe how lucky I'd been. And she said, so we are clearly the best behaved class in the school, aren't we? And they went, yeah, best behaved class in the school. And they agreed, and they lived up to it. So normally these kids were giving their, you know, they would go off to PE and rip their PE teacher's head off and cause all sorts of mischief. But a new label had arrived for them, which I thought was incredible. I had two people outside of education outside of schools that I led, who I used to call them the dynamic duo. And so it was a label applied just to two people. And I'd walk past them in the staff room and say, what are you talking about? And they'd chat about something. I go, yeah, I like that. Yeah, talking about the weather. Yeah, good. Hey, listen, I've got a problem that I'm pretty sure only the dynamic duo can solve. And I'll just throw an issue at them. And they would just go, yeah, okay, well, we're the dynamic duo. We're going to live up to that. So I think that the imperative here for leading a team that learns is to seize the opportunity that exists within your language. It's to say, I will positively stigmatise people. I'll put labels on them that they are not yet living up to, that may not even be true, in the hope that they will eventually live up to it if I say it often enough. The next thing I want you to do is to intentionalise respect. Now, I spoke before about respect and trust being two things that emerge from the work of the authoritative, not the authoritarian leader. Respect is a really interesting topic to explore just momentarily. A lot of people, I think these days, have come to this notion that respect is something that that we associate with people being nice to us. And it's utterly false, utterly untrue. We don't associate respect with niceness. If I were to ask you now to think of a person that you greatly respect, and then if I asked you to think about all of the things that they did that compelled you to respect them, not all of them would be pleasant. And in fact, what happens with people that we respect is that they, because of their firmness and fairness, because of their intention to I guess, put in front of us challenge as well as support, they've earned the right to call us on our behaviour. The people we respect are allowed to tell us that we need to lift our game. And if you think about a time that a person in your life has challenged you on your behaviour and they've been someone that you respect, you heard those words. You heard them loudly. So what we need to do sometimes is just stop and say, okay, if I've got a team that doesn't respect me as a leader, or perhaps they didn't respect their previous leader and I've been promoted into this position or airdropped into that role, the first thing we need to do if we want to get them to respect you is to put significant enough challenge in front of them, is to put something in front of them that they haven't yet done before. And to support them like crazy to reach it, to support them like crazy to meet that risk. And it'll feel risky to them, but they will get genuinely excited by the notion that you are there with them holding their hand at the top of the scaffold and that you're prepared to jump with them. So intentionalising respect is about intentionalising the placing of challenge and risk in front of people, differentiating the ability to learn. And this is, again, what great teachers do, is they put people in the window between too hard and too easy with outrageous regularity. it's an area of struggle, it's an area of difficulty, but we respect people who will stand in that struggle with us and help us get to the other side of it. Next thing to talk about is about how it is that we can get practiced at problem solving. Now, many of you would be fully aware of Gladwell's theory of 10,000 hours to become a master at something, and I think that stands reasonably true as well. Yet it's interesting, isn't it? If we want people to be brilliant at problem solving in our workplaces, we don't let them get to 10,000 hours. We don't even help them get to 10,000 hours. They do that 10,000 hours in risk. They do it in trepidation and stress because there's fear of outcome. We give them problems and we hope that they're going to get it right. And if they don't, we might critique them. We might give them negative feedback. And a lot of the time, because of the negative affect or feeling that they experience from that, they don't give it another go, which means that their progress towards 10,000 hours stalls horribly unless we place in front of them opportunities to practice their problem solving without fear of outcome. And that means just bringing opportunities into these teams for them to be able to get good at problem solving in a really enjoyable way. Put puzzles in front of them, put challenges in front of them. There's a couple that I've used with teams that I've worked with. One is game of possibilities, where you just give a team a random object and you say, what I would like you to do is to come up with the best workplace use of this object as we go in our organisation. And it's just fascinating, to watch people try to come up with a workplace opportunity for a potato, or for a new vase, and it's practice. It's not. It's if you want to get good at cricket, cricketers don't spend most of their time playing cricket. They spend a lot of time in the nets, practicing and getting good at it, so that the risk of failure when the stakes are higher has been reduced because they get the chance to practice problem solving. Another little activity that you can do is winner and loser. And basically it's a way of reframing problems for people and giving them a chance to explore it differently. So we get people in pairs, and you ask them to describe something horrible that happened to them, a negative experience, and you get the person opposite to them to retell the story back to them using only the positive elements of it. And usually what people talk to is lessons learned. So this is learning becoming evident within failure, learning becoming evident within struggle and difficulty. And it emphasises to people that the opportunities to learn are boundless and everywhere. So it's a great little game, and it's just practice. You don't have to get that right. You don't have to get that wrong. There are no stakes attached to it. It's practice at the notion of something going horribly wrong, but being able to go, there was something worthwhile in there. There was a lesson. There's a silver lining that's hiding in there. One that I complete regularly when I work with teams, and I do this with adults, and I also do it in my work in schools with students, around becoming resilient. We need practice at being resilient, at being able to hack it when things go wrong, at being able to thrive despite risk. And I give people a big pile of Lego, and I tell them, right, I want you to build me a house that reminds me of my 9 years that I spent with my family living in Darwin. And I go. Oh, by the way, you'll know before you start that you'll know whether you met my standard or not. And I produce a big rubber mallet, and I tell them that the standard will come crashing down upon your house if I don't think it's good enough. You've got 4 minutes, go. And people go like crazy. There's something about Lego that just whips people into a frenzy. It's wonderful to watch. And they build me a house, and then someone in the team will be the foreperson, and they will tell me what they built. And every single time, I don't care how good the house is, how impressive their design is, every single time I smash it. Because I'm not interested here in whether their house was any good or not. What I'm interested in here is how well they bounce back from the adversity of failing, even if it's a cruel, arbitrary one. Sometimes I get grown men in suits who will go, who the second time around, because I'll then give them a heap of feedback about how, gee, come on guys, it's Darwin. We've got to elevate the house to get some cross breezes and cool it off. I'm going to need you to put like a little green bit on the roof and tell me it's a cane toad. I'm going to need a place in the yard where I can cool off, like a pool or a spa. I'm going to need to cook outside. Where on earth is the barbecue area? I mean, come on, it's Darwin. There's a 4-wheel drive and a boat in the driveway, surely, so we can go barramundi fishing. I give them all this feedback, and then I say, you got half the time. Half the time, build me another one. And it's got to be better, or I'm going to smash it again. And sometimes I'll get people with low resilience who are going, oh, fine then. And, they'll put 2 bits of Lego together and stick them on the table. And I'll go, smash that then, smarty pants. It tells me all I need to know about their resilience, all I need to know about their ability to pick themselves up and solve problems when they when things are difficult. I was working with a fabulous leader called Janet Matthews just a couple of weeks ago, and she said, Adam, the greatest test of character I've been able to find is to observe the way that people respond when they're disappointed. And I think that Janet's onto something. It's the people that go holus bolus into it, divide labour really quickly. You guys do the outside stuff. You guys do the boat and the car. You guys do the house, the structure of the house. We'll bring it all back together when he yells out that there's 20 seconds to go. And they do. Almost invariably, they build a better house in 2 minutes than they did in the first attempt where they had 4 minutes. It's because teams that are resilient can accept feedback. Teams that are resilient are more robust, and teams that are resilient and have practiced resilience are able to handle it when their first plan doesn't work. And that's something that's incredibly valuable within a learning team, and it's something that we should look to cultivate and harness ourselves. And the last thing I want to suggest to you today is that you prioritise cooperation. And that means I guess what I want to do is come full circle a fraction here. I want to come back to this notion that, about French zebra crossings, that it's about our intention. It's about how we want, it's about being clear about what we want to come from, the notion of pulling people together and getting them to learn in teams. And I think that what we want is a process objective, not an outcome objective. So we need to release what we think the outcome is going to be. I had a couple of teachers once that I had a privilege, as some people will know on the webcast today, to open a brand new school as a principal. So there's a lot of educational design, a lot of high level thinking, and there's some risk associated with that because when you try new things, you're never sure they're going to work. We were a government school, and so there were some issues around budget, around working with infrastructure, around working with contractors that meant that we got the keys to the school 48 hours before the kids came. How are we going to handle this? Now, I knew that there were 4 key imperatives that I wanted evident in my school. We called them the Big Four. I won't bore you with them now because it's just teacher speak. But I also knew that I had students arriving in 48 hours, and it was going to be very difficult to tell people exactly what I wanted in their classrooms when all the furniture for their classrooms was wrapped in plastic in the corner of it. 2 teachers who were going to be working together came to me and said, Adam, how do you want us to set up the classroom? I said, listen, these are the Big Four. These are the Big Four imperatives you need to have in place. I'm going to trust you to work together. I'm going to trust you to be accountable to each other. I'm going to trust you to come up with some ideas, and I'm going to trust you that one of you is not going to do all the work and let the other do all the sweating here. And it was Darwin, so there was some sweating. And I got out of the way. I had it in my head what the outcome should probably look like. But when I got to that classroom 48 hours later, to see 2 teachers who had worked an entire weekend to try and do those things that I said that they should do together, what they had created was ridiculously different to what I had envisaged in my head. It was so much better. It was extraordinary. And what I've come to deduce from that is that there are 4 key components that drive really effective cooperation from people. And the first one is interdependence. Interdependence means design tasks for people where they need each other to get the job done. So it's not always about saying, oh, fine, we don't want anybody in there that can get away with, if you want something done right, you've got to do it yourself. Everyone else get out of my way and I'll get it done. You need each other to get that done. In basketball, to draw another analogy, there's a famous move called the pick and roll. One member of the team blocks while the other sort of rolls off to the other direction and gets the ball back as they get closer to the ring. And you need each other to do their job, because if one person doesn't do it, they don't get the job done. So you have to be about teamwork. Secondly, that's what's evident within great learning teams and great cooperation is accountability. Which means that there's no hogs and logs. We don't have one person who says, great, I love group work, it's my time to do everything, and including take all the credit. And there's no hogs. that say, great, it's a group project, it's my time to do bugger all. We step up together, and each person has role, and each person has accountability to that role. And what we find is no hogs, no logs, but we get cogs who genuinely work together. Then what happens in great cooperation is what's usually evident is work think sharing, and that's about division of labour. It's about making sure that people are contributing their bit, no matter how good, no matter how bad it is, but the effort has been distributed across the team really evenly. And then fourthly is simultaneous interaction, which means there ain't no time to sit on the bench. We don't wait for our turn in true cooperation to come in, here's my bit, and then I leave. To use one more sporting analogy, forgive me for people who don't do it, there are no punters. In the NFL, in the American gridiron, there are some people, often Australians, because we're apparently so good at kicking balls, there are people called punters who can come onto the field and their job is to walk onto the field, punt the ball long and turn around and walk off. We don't do that in genuinely successful cooperation. You don't get to consider that being a part of the team is that I come in, I do my bit, and then 5 seconds later I run away. We have active players all of the time. So when we're talking about teams, we're talking about all the players who are on the field, and we're maximising the amount of players on the field all the time. When we do that, I think we get wonderful cooperation starting to happen. That's what I'd like to encourage you to do in your teams. Hey, I reckon that's probably enough content for you today, me sort of shoving that down your throat. But look, if absorbing that has been something of a challenge today, because I know that I can talk quickly and I go backwards and forwards from point to story very deliberately and rapidly from time to time. Just note that in the GoToWebinar control panel today, there's an opportunity for you to download the whole slide deck. Would love, love, love for you to be able to revisit some of these concepts around effective teams today. So make sure you take advantage of that. And the last thing I want to do before you scamper off to start to do this work is to remind you about our next webinar. Now, this is a webinar that for me, I think it's the most important webinar I've designed for the Real Learners community. Because this gets to the heart of what I'm talking about in terms of what learning does. And I think that it improves conduct. I think it improves the way that people actually treat each other when they're at work. And I think that if we can allow this learning theory to impact people and to change the people in your organisation, what happens is you change the way they cooperate. And so we're going to redesign the way that people treat each other in your workplace in our very next webinar. This has become a bit of a passion project for me, this notion of conduct, and I'm going to be using it to write a book at some stage. That dear to my heart about what this whole learning thing's all about is this notion of the way people conduct themselves around each other. I think when people learn together and they achieve together, the conduct changes, and that's what we're going to be redesigning in our very next webinar. So looking forward to having you at that one. Hey, if there's anything else I can do for you, here's our contact details. I won't read them off the screen to you. You don't need that. But please, if there's anything that we can do to give you a hand, then make sure you reach out. Hey, thanks so much, everyone, for coming along. I've really appreciated having you today, learning about learning teams. Hope it's been of value to you, and I'll see you when we talk about conduct. Okay, bye for now.